keeps you motivated.
It keeps you motivated. And what I see in James, it keeps him happy. James is no different to any other young boy, and he just wants that equal chance to participate.
I'm in 5th class and I love swimming. I put my head underwater for the very first time. I felt like so excited and very proud of myself. It feels like if I was like floating in the air.
I will be forever grateful for my school teacher. She created an opportunity that changed my life in more ways than I could ever imagine.
I would tell you to play sports because it's very energetic and you can do anything like gymnastics, athletics, yoga, and GAN and loads more.
And as James rightfully said, the structures are in place. All you have to do is tweak it. Small changes can make the biggest difference.
That is the importance of inclusion for people with disabilities in sport and physical activity. It can change their lives in incredible ways.
We just want to give our child the best chance in life, and if sport is his way of doing things, well, that's all we'll do. We'll find a way to do it.
Well, it is time for our first session, and it is Sport in a Time of Change. We have Joanna Reardon, Benny Cullen and Paul Carr for this. And seeing how we have just heard from one very inspirational young woman, I suppose we should really start with another, and that is, of course, Joanne. Hiya, Joanne. I always see you as being a journalist, but obviously you're so much more than that. So maybe you can just remind people of your background.
Yeah, so obviously I'm Joanne. I was born with a rare condition known as total amelia. That means I was born without all of my limbs, and there's no medical reason as to why this happened. So I've been kind of mad into sport really since the get-go. My siblings used to take me out all the time, kick footballs at my head until I was concussed. And yeah, I think then my parents kind of decided they wanted me to kind of hang out with people like myself, but I kind of knew from the get-go I was never going to be an athlete. So that's when I decided to be a sports journalist. But other than that, I've done obviously different activism and campaigning. We reversed a cut in 2011 in a budget cut they were going to make to domiciliary payments for people with disabilities. And then I've gone to the United Nations to talk about the impact of technology on everyday life for people with disabilities. And my brother released a documentary about my life to get into sports employment and journalism and different things like that. So yeah.
Is it really bad that Joanne just tells us about how she spoke at the United Nations and has made all these changes, and all I can think about are her siblings firing footballs at her head when she was little. She did mention that documentary, and it is really lovely. Let's get a little sample of that now and get a further idea about Joanne.
I had never seen somebody missing a hand, one hand or one leg. Not am I missing all 4 limbs. The first thing that came into my head like was, what will you ever do?
life just like you. I don't want to live in the shadow of others because I want to make my own journey in life. And I know if I'm given the chance, I can and will succeed.
Joanne, it certainly seems like you've spent your life making sure that things just don't hold you back. So what were the extra challenges that you faced then since COVID kicked in?
I suppose really like everyone else, I've been stuck at home with my parents, which is not where you want to be when you're 24 years of age. I've kind of had to adapt like everyone else. I suppose for me it's kind of funny because I think it's kind of come full circle in a way, because it was 8 years ago I went on to talk about how technology is going to have a massive impact on connecting people, not just people with disabilities, but everyone. And I think now we've realized how important it actually is. And it's still funny because people will throw it back to me when I have mad tech difficulties. They're like, oh, you spoke at the UN on tech and you still don't have good Wi-Fi. I'm like, it's not my fault. But no, I think overall, the challenges that I face, we obviously have to get incredibly creative. I meet people for a living all the time, be at events, going around to different matches and things like that. So for me, that was the biggest issue that I kind of came across, was I was meeting my parents and my PA all over again, like the same day. So the monotony kind of the whole thing kind of got me down a little bit. But then I decided to do something different. I decided I'd start practicing my yoga a little bit more. I decided to start focusing on my writing a little bit more. I realized how incredibly boring I was when we were told to keep a diary on lockdown. And I was like, today I woke up, it was great. But yeah, I kind of decided to challenge myself a little bit further. I always get a little bit more flexible and a bit more strong in my core. So I decided to kind of go full throttle with yoga and take 15 minutes of my day every single day to see if I could achieve that. And I think I have, even though my doctor might say otherwise.
So basically she's become Iron Woman over lockdown. That's good to hear. But you mentioned the technology, and that's interesting because we're going to be speaking to Benny about that in a little while. But what in particular do you think about technology can help people within sport, people with disabilities, get more involved and get more out of it?
I think in general, some of the barriers that I would face pre-COVID would have been access into buildings, like metaphorical access to the services and different things like that. And I think with technology and everything kind of going online, I no longer have the barrier of not being able to access anything. Okay, fair enough, my internet might say otherwise, but I'm able to connect up to kind of whoever I have to talk to. I'm able to connect to more people, I would say, around the world than I would have kind of ever before. So for me, it's about creating a connectivity and an access, getting rid of the access barrier that we would have faced for a long time. I think yourself, working in RT and stuff, going to games, there's not a lot of access in stadiums. There's not a lot of access kind of where you have to go. And for me, that's a huge barrier. But now with kind of on the way work has kind of changed, for me, I don't have to go to stadium. I can just sit at home and watch the game and do it that way. As much as I prefer to be at the game, but different things like that you or anyone else would take for granted are obstacles that I would face that now I don't really have to face as much. So I kind of hope that post-COVID and post-pandemic that would be the lesson that we would learn to make things a bit more accessible for people, be it in the workforce, be it in sports, and all different places, because I think that's hugely important.
No, absolutely. And Benny Cullen from Sport Ireland is with us as well. And Benny, have you a particular interest as well in how technology might help people with disabilities to get more out of sport as the years go on?
Hi, Joanne. Yeah, look, I think that's a space that is undoubtedly going to grow. And really interesting to hear Joanne's perspectives there. That a lot of people have turned to the opportunities that are available in their homes or in their locality. There's no doubt that rolling out Zoom sessions and Facebook sessions and various social media sessions are going to be part of that. But I think also offering people some of the old school tangible resources. So in my job, I invest in the network of local sports partnerships. And one of the big pieces of feedback from the sports partnerships is this, just tangible need for people to touch things, and to read things. And so actually, a lot of our work has actually been going back to the old school resources of printing leaflets for people, posting them in through their letterboxes, and posting them into disability services and services for older adults, so that there's access to everybody, not just those who are involved and have access to technology, but also those who have print resources.
So when we're talking about technology, really we're talking about the real basics, are we?
To a large extent, yeah. And there's two stories here. There's one story of the haves. And Ellen used the term privileged earlier on. So kind of those of us who are lucky enough to have both the technological knowledge, which Joanne touched on as well. So that access to tech and knowing how to use tech, but also can afford technology, and can afford the tablets and the mobile phones and all the rest. And sometimes the subscription is to access some of those services. That's one side of the story, and there's no doubt that we've seen a big growth in that space, and that we're seeing people taking more ownership of their activity opportunities. And that, even from what Joanne was saying there, we see it both for able people, but also for people with a disability. And on the flip side, we've those who are maybe more disadvantaged, who maybe can't afford the access to technology, or maybe more rurally isolated. Maybe they don't have the same kind of broadband as we get in those urban areas. And so it's important that we don't forget about those people, or people who are in services and may not necessarily even have access to computers. Older adults maybe in residential care, or even people with disability who may be in disability services. And so it's important that we don't just take that technological approach, but we also take that more hands-on approach as well. Finding that balance.
And is there a way you can combat then help the people who don't have the technology, as you were saying? Like, how do you find that balance?
So we've done a number of things this year. Particularly for people with a disability, we rolled out what we called an Activities for All program. So this was a resource that we developed in a way that it could be promoted through technology. So it's promoted through social media. It's got social media vignettes. It lays out a number of really accessible exercises that everybody can do. And it also helps people to build a physical activity routine. So there's a routine planner at the end. There's some behavioral change strategies in there in terms of helping people to prepare the night before so we get active the next day. So we did that through technology. Local sports partnerships rolled out online video sessions that people could access and be inspired to be active. We also developed the resource so it could be printed. So it's printed on a two-sided leaflet. We took advantage of, on Post were really generous and offered free postage to the residential services. So we took advantage of that and posted those resources out to those residential services to ensure that we could both get the technological benefits, but also those benefits of more tangible resources.
That's really, really good to hear. Is there any other way that LSPs have had to adapt? I'm sure there are many, many ways, but any in particular that have stood out for you?
Yeah, look, I think they've been really resilient, and there's two parts to our journey in this space of helping to increase activity for people with a disability. One part is changing activity levels, but another part is changing hearts and minds and attitudes. And so, although as we yo-yo through the phases of lockdown, and sometimes we can get people out and active, and sometimes we can't, and sometimes we're relying on technology and printed resources, we can continue to advocate for the cause. And so I think that's something that LSPs are continuing to work with. And so perhaps as activity levels and on-the-ground programming has dropped off, they've continued to do work, on aspects of things like promoting the Disability Charter that was developed in partnership with PARA, promoting that within club settings. So during lockdown, LSPs rolled out a club support grant for COVID resources. And within that club support grant, we put in a question around whether clubs were registered to the PARA Charter for people with a disability. And PARA saw a huge surge then, because we were using the opportunity to highlight that cultural change and that need for clubs of that inclusive.
Okay, Benny, thanks for the moment. Do stay there. We'll be coming back to you and to Joanne. And don't forget, you can ask questions using the chat function as well. But we've got Paul from Basketball Ireland with us as well. And hey, Paul, I know that indoor sports in particular have really, really suffered during this pandemic, because obviously we know it's much easier to get outdoors and much safer to get outdoors. So how difficult have you found it?
Hi, Joanne. Yeah, it's been quite a difficult time for indoor sport, especially basketball. And the way we're looking at it at the moment in terms of inclusion and stuff like that is getting our priorities in place with the structures behind that. So the first thing we did this year was obviously sign the charter, and then we engaged with the accessible program with Cara as well. And that's really brought us up to standard in terms of how we communicate on our websites, how we communicate with people with disabilities in general, and how we plan our activities and everything that goes with that. We also have tried to do the same focus with our own clubs and get them up to standard during this time. So we started off last year with only 3 clubs that had signed up to the Cara Charter. We now have over 30. We also, using our Clubmark program that we developed this year, we put in that any club passing the first level would need to have signed the charter, have a sport inclusion officer assigned, and have a sport inclusion policy within their club. And that has been successful. We have over 10 clubs now who have that in place. And I suppose the pictures you're seeing on the screen is what we're really aiming to get, is the likes of Portlaoise Panthers there, who have taken on the role as a mainstream club to provide inclusion basketball. That has started now, that our clubs have started to do that, and we have 3 or 4 clubs throughout the country who are providing that, and we want to make more links with Special Olympics and IWA and other NGBs to create a better partnership with our mainstream clubs and us in Basketball Ireland with them.
And are you getting really good feedback from various clubs that that's what they want to do and that's something that they're really, really interested, as long as they get the right support there and right structures in place to help them do exactly that?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose we started this year, we highlighted some of the good work that was being done by some of our clubs, so the likes of Aina Basketball Club in Dublin, Portlaoise Panthers, Kilkenny Stars, clubs like this who kind of beat us to the punch, and we're doing this already. And since we highlighted that, I've had numerous clubs come to me saying we want to get this going, and unfortunately COVID hit at that particular time and they weren't able to do it. And since then, what we're looking at is trying to get the people trained up and get the programs put in place. So the Cara courses, whether it's autism in sport or disability awareness training, getting the coaches who want to take this on trained and prepared and ready to go for when COVID goes away, hopefully. And I suppose the big thing we want to see, you know, Special Olympics and IWA in particular have done fantastic work with disability basketball for years. It's up to us now as an NGB not just to support them and highlight the work they're doing, but do the work ourselves. And there's no reason why, if you're a parent and you have one child who has a disability and one child who doesn't, that you have to take them to 2 separate clubs. Why can't one basketball club provide inclusion basketball and then link with the Special Olympics club, link with the IWA club, and work together, so that you and your siblings or you and your parents can be part of the same club?
And is it, you mentioned trying to get people trained up, is it finding the people first of all initially that's a challenge, and is it getting the right training as well and getting all these things running smoothly together?
Yeah, I suppose the one thing we always say to clubs is look in your community, look in your club, see the people you have. They may not have the greatest basketball knowledge, but they may be good with and have experience with dealing with people with disabilities, and therefore we can train them in a basketball senses. And then if it's someone who has great basketball skills and great basketball knowledge but have no knowledge or experience dealing with people with disabilities, we can train them through the Cara courses. And we're at the moment looking at online resources and online training the same way I'm sure a lot of NGBs are at the moment. But having the Cara courses online and being able to do that online has been a great help, and being able to get people prepared to start back when COVID eventually goes away, hopefully.
Oh, fingers crossed. If I can go back to Joanne just for a few minutes now, because obviously Joanne is a journalist. From where you've been able to look at things and how things have been going on, what do you think has been done well from a people with disability involved in sport point of view during COVID, and what do you think can be done a whole lot better?
For me, I think the appetite is much bigger from when I was younger. Like, I remember when I was about 10 or 11 years old, like, you were just brought into like a GA hall and you were just told to kind of play amongst yourselves and just enjoy yourself and have a good time. And I grew up in an environment where, as I said, my siblings were very competitive with me. Like, they did not let me get away with things. They made sure that like I was primed and ready to go to like secondary school, primary school, to kick around with my friends, you know, and things like that. So like, I remember like sports, as I said, when I was younger, they just didn't really, it's not that they didn't care, but they just didn't seem to understand that maybe some of us could have had a competitive edge. Maybe some of us had a drive and a desire to succeed. And I think, you know, hearing kind of Ellen's story, hearing, you know, everyone else kind of talk about how they've kind of changed their sport and, you know, how they're kind of working with people with disabilities, that didn't exist when I was younger. Like, it was just very much a thing that was done on the side. And sure, it's great that Johnny gets to go have a kick around, doesn't it? And like, I remember giving out to a paralyzed kid in goals and being thrown off a team because I was too competitive. But now, like, that, I'm not saying that doesn't seem to be the case, but now it's a friendly but competitive environment, because I think, you know, sports psychologists will tell you that sports is the best way to learn how to fail and how to succeed. And it's the best way to learn how to problem solve. It's the best way to learn more about yourself than anything else you could possibly do. And I think now, you know, going around to different events, going around to different places, I see that much more now. You know, there is a desire to instill a competitive belief and a desire to succeed and fail in people with disabilities that definitely wasn't there when I was there. Like, I was the oddball wanting to be Roy Keane. Everyone else wanted to be good, you know, but I wanted to be like insanely good.
I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're speaking my language, Joanne. Are there still though major challenges there, or can you see them gradually being sort of wiped away?
I think the challenges are kind of still the same, you know, like, you know, people would say, you know, lack of funding, you know, for different things, because I think what people don't understand, especially from my point of view, is for me to do a sport, you have to get a little bit creative. You have to change the sport a tiny bit, like, as you know it. Like, I remember when I was bobsleighing with British Olympians, because it was just a thing I wanted to do, and we were able to do it. And I remember they were like, oh my God, like, you can't actually sit by yourself, can you? And I was like, no, I'm 2 foot, like, and I'm only about 2 stone. Like, there's no way I could manage a bobsleigh by myself. And we had to sit in with other people, you know, to weigh it down. You know, so I think people, you know, are getting creative, but I think unfortunately, like, lack of funding, and I think the lack of access to services maybe that they would want is still a barrier that exists. But, you know, as everyone else has alluded to so far, because these are all going online, there's a much easier way to access them now. And I think maybe since the pandemic, people have a desire to want to help other people, because it's just kind of the way, you know, that we've become, you know, in society. You know, we're very Mayfair driven, which is fine, but I think now with a pandemic, we've realised the importance of community and inclusivity and access for people, and that's super important.
That is such a brilliant point. Benny, I was going to ask if you've ever been in a bobsleigh. I don't think anything is holding her back. She seems to be doing more than anybody else is. But instead, Benny, what I might ask you about is, because Joanne brings up funding, because you're the Sport Ireland rep with us today, and that's always key to development in anything, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what an inspiration Joanne is. You're dead right. I'd love to go into a bobsleigh. Maybe she can link me in with the Olympic team there in the UK, and I could get a there's no doubt about it. You know, the investment into the space of sports participation for people with a disability on the high performance end is critical to making changes in that space. And I suppose the good news is the investment has been going up. You know, it does go up year on year, and the gradients are moving. As Joanne said, you know, that anecdote about more people with a disability having opportunities to be active, we know that that's happening at population level now. So that's good. The trouble is, gradients move slowly, and investment transitions move slowly as well. So what we really need to see is start to see things like the SIDO network that we invested in have nationally 2 years ago, to really start seeing that making a difference on the ground. And we've laid those challenges out. That the investments are there. The people who are receiving those investments need to try and make the most of them, try and increase the opportunities for people with disability, try and increase the reach into those populations. And I think Joanne made a really good point as well about trying to, or it might have been Paul actually, been trying to integrate it into general participation. So it's not just you know, the people with disability grouped in by themselves, but that they're integrated into the culture. And I think that will require a little bit more of an investment. You know, it requires that cultural piece that I spoke about earlier on. So, I mean, there's some good news there. Like even that piece of work that LSPs did during COVID, we know that more than 50% of sports clubs have members with a disability. So that transition, that cultural shift is happening. The numbers of people who are signed up for the Cara Charter are increasing every year. So it's about matching the increase of investment with the actions and the cultural change on the ground. And the more we see on the action side and cultural side, the more the investment can be justified and more we can see that.
And isn't that one of the points that Joanne was making, actually, Benny, about the fact that she has seen this change, certainly in people's attitudes, which is all part of where culture comes from. Have you noticed that as well? Is there this change that is happening?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the lockdown started in March. By the time April, May called around, one of the big areas of focus was for people with a disability. And Joanne's right, the awareness has definitely increased. And so it was one of the first places that we started looking at supporting through the local sports partnerships, but also with the national governing bodies. There's been a specific working group set up in response to COVID to help to support the disability NGBs and the local sports partnerships and organisations like Cara to ensure that people with disabilities continue to have those opportunities. I think, I'm hopeful that we can respond to the pandemic in a way that things will be even better post-pandemic than they were before pandemic for people with a disability, and I think for everyone. I think we see that cultural change not just in sport but in society in general. We see increased investments in active transport, increased investments in sport. So there's this realization that sport and physical activity are pivotal to our physical health, to our mental health, but also to social cohesion and building relationships and generally positive society. But I think the future looks bright from an investment.
And just, Paul, just what are the key priorities do you think that should be made within Basketball Ireland for 2021?
Yeah, well, for people with disabilities, there's a lot of stuff that we need to do, and there's a lot of stuff that we have done that has built on to lead on to in 2021. I suppose we have our Including People with Disabilities policy, which is helping us. We have a clear sight of what we want to do. We engage with the Accessible programme with Cara, which again has given us a clear points and things to achieve, and we hope to, once we pass the bronze level, to move on to the silver level. But I think for us in general, it's, as I said earlier, it's really about taking ownership. There is a certain amount that you can just do, and it can be a very easy process of just signing up to the charter and sharing a few posts on Facebook, but you have to be actively targeting clubs, targeting people and changing their focus. So by putting the charter into our club mark, and by putting the having an inclusion policy into our club mark, clubs have started to really look at this area now and have really started to go, okay, we could be doing something around this. There's a population in our community who are not getting physical activity or who are not playing basketball just because they have a disability, and we can, if we put the right structures in place and we sign up to the charter and we put our policy in place, we can change that, and we can provide these people with not only sport but basketball, which we at Basketball Ireland want. We want people playing our sport, and there has been a long tradition of, Special Olympic clubs have been fantastic playing basketball, and obviously their international teams have had some great success. Same with the IWA. But it's up to us in the so-called mainstream to take on that mantle now and say, you have done great work. We're here to support you, but it shouldn't all be left to you. This is our sport. We should be leading from the front, and we should be helping create better basketball players, create more volunteers, create better coaches, and a higher standard of coaching for your NGB and your Special Olympics or IWA or Deaf Sport Ireland or whoever it is basketball teams.
I really couldn't think of an absolutely better way to end our first session with words like that. Take ownership, and it's up to us. A huge thank you to all three of our speakers, to Paul, to Benny and to Joanne.